In 2022, Queen Elizabeth II of the United Kingdom passed away, ending her 70-year reign and surpassing Queen Victoria's previous record to become the longest reigning monarch in British history. However, when news of the British Queen's death emerged, the people of neighboring France seemed somewhat relieved. This is because the world record for the longest reign still belongs to France's Louis XIV, the Sun King, who ascended to the throne before he was 5 years old and died just 4 days before his 77th birthday, reigning for a total of 72 years and 110 days. In the 17th century, particularly in an era before the development of modern surgery, Louis XIV's 72-year reign was no small feat. He outlived his own son and grandson, with his great-grandson Louis XV succeeding him. After the death of Queen Elizabeth II, it is unlikely that anyone will break the Sun King's record, which also brings a sigh of relief to the French. Today, with the number of monarchies decreasing and medical conditions improving, although the health of monarchs is better protected, the age at which monarchs ascend to the throne is generally later, making it even more difficult to break the record for long reigns. Born on September 5, 1638, and passing away on September 1, 1715, just 4 days shy of his 77th birthday, Louis XIV lived nearly twice as long as the average European lifespan of 35 years during the 17th century. However, this doesn't mean his long life was achieved effortlessly. In fact, from the moment of his birth, death seemed to frequently knock at his door. He survived numerous close brushes with death, miraculously escaping each time and proving to be a formidable opponent to the Grim Reaper. The birth of Louis XIV was itself an obstetric miracle. His mother, Anne of Austria, was already 37 years old at the time, which was considered advanced maternal age by contemporary standards. Anne had been married to Louis XIII for over 20 years without conceiving and was believed to be past the age of fertility, making it seemingly impossible for her to provide an heir to the French throne. For many years, Queen Anne endured harsh criticism for her lack of offspring, often retreating to convents in search of tranquility. However, it's important to note that Louis XIII also bore significant responsibility for their childlessness. After initial unsuccessful attempts to conceive, and particularly after a miscarriage resulting from a fall, Louis XIII showed little concern for producing an heir. In his youth, Louis XIII preferred to indulge in hunting and revelry with his favored young courtiers near Versailles. As he reached middle age without an heir, he grew anxious and turned to various religious ceremonies, praying to the Virgin Mary and Jesus for a healthy successor to the French throne. Given the average lifespan at the time, Louis XIII had already surpassed the critical age of 35, and given his poor health, there was a real risk he might die suddenly, leaving the throne without a direct heir. Louis XIII once publicly vowed that if the Virgin Mary granted France a prince, he would build a magnificent altar for her in Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. However, as his Prime Minister, Cardinal Richelieu, reminded him, producing an heir required personal effort from the king himself, something not even God could replace. The Prime Minister's words reminded the king that he should not just rely on verbal prayers. On a rainy night in 1637, heavy storms blocked the roads, and Louis XIII, who had planned to travel to Versailles, was forced to stay overnight at the Louvre Palace. After dinner that evening, inspired by his Prime Minister's admonition to take action or you will never have a son, Louis XIII unusually visited the Queen's chambers. On this special night, the future Sun King, Louis XIV, was conceived and later born. The news of the Queen giving birth at an advanced age quickly spread across Europe, and the French people were overjoyed at the birth of the crown prince, celebrating in Paris for 3 consecutive days and nights. From birth, Louis XIV was seen as a miracle and was named Louis Dieudonné, meaning God-given in French, a name directly translating to Deus Datus in Latin. To the common people of the time, The crown prince was indeed seen as a child bestowed by God. Although Louis XIII did not fulfill his promise to the Virgin Mary during his lifetime, Louis XIV accomplished this on behalf of his father by erecting a magnificent altar in Notre Dame Cathedral, which became the main altar there, fortuitously surviving the fire in 2019. Louis XIII died shortly after fulfilling his duty of fathering a child, and Louis XIV ascended the throne at just 4 years and 8 months old, thus beginning his lifelong resilient struggle with death. Shortly after ascending the throne at the age of 5, Louis XIV was playing near a fountain in the Palace of Paris under the supervision of his nurse. However, the nurse, being careless, failed to notice the playful young king climbing onto the edge of the fountain. Moments later, Louis XIV fell into the water with a splash. Although the fountain was not deep, it was enough to drown a 5-year-old child. Struggling and splashing, he was fortunate to be seen by a soldier nearby who sprinted like a sprinter to rescue him, ultimately saving his life. At the age of 9, Louis XIV contracted smallpox, one of the deadliest epidemics of the time. Due to the relatively weaker immunity and resistance of children, the survival rate for those infected with smallpox was extremely low. The doctors declared him beyond help and advised preparing for the worst. However, unexpectedly, he miraculously recovered at the last moment. Even in his later years, scars from the smallpox could still be seen on the wings of his nose. When he was 15, Louis XIV experienced chest tightness and a persistent cough. Doctors diagnosed him with a chest tumor, which at that time was considered incurable. However, after some time, the king miraculously healed on his own, which was later speculated to possibly be a misdiagnosis by the doctors. By the age of 17, Louis XIV, undergoing the physical developments of puberty, developed a great interest in sexual activities. It was said that during this period, he frequently favored court maids and peasant girls, even resulting in the pregnancy of a gardener's daughter. Despite gaining recognition at court for his virility, the king unfortunately contracted a sexually transmitted disease. Doctors initially predicted it might affect his fertility, but Louis XIV soon recovered fully, without any apparent impact on his ability to father children. At 19, during the Fronde Rebellion, Louis XIV contracted a deadly infectious disease known as marsh fever, similar to malaria. The disease progressed rapidly, and the king suffered from fever, vomiting, and severe physical weakness, which led to dehydration and a comatose state. The doctors believed that the king was at death's door, thinking he might not survive this time. With treatments proving ineffective, the court resigned itself to the imminent death of Louis XIV, marking what was one of the closest brushes with death in his life, apart from his actual demise. The entire court, including a grieving Queen Mother Anne, believed his end was near. A priest had even administered the last rites, preparing for his final moments. However, in a critical moment when the king seemed destined to die, the doctors decided to make a last-ditch effort using a risky but potent medication. Incredibly, a few days later, Louis XIV fully recovered his health. This miraculous recovery stunned everyone, and even death had to step back, admiring the resilience of the Sun King. Louis XIV's health issues did not end in his youth. At the age of 22, he suffered from dysentery, but subsequently recovered. At 24, he contracted hives and fortunately regained his health once again. During his younger years, he was robust and suffered no serious illnesses. However, by the age of 47, Louis XIV, due to his long-standing love of horseback riding, developed a painful anal fistula, a particularly embarrassing ailment for men, which plagued him for a long time. Unable to bear the pain any longer, Louis XIV decided to undergo a risky surgical procedure to permanently resolve this distressing condition. In the 17th century, surgical medicine had not yet emerged as a scientific discipline. So-called surgeons were often barbers, which is not an exaggeration since the tools used were similar, mainly small knives. Consider the risks involved in undergoing surgery in such a medical context, and furthermore, anesthetics had not yet been invented at the time, so patients had to endure 100% of the pain. Eventually, a barber surgeon from Avignon named Felix was recommended to the court. Felix diligently studied for 6 months, repeatedly designing and improving surgical tools, and conducted numerous trials on pigs and condemned prisoners. On the morning of November 1686 at 7 o'clock, it was Felix's time to perform. Before the surgery, Louis XIV told Felix, "Treat me as if I were the humblest peasant." Under the watchful eyes of the royal family and the nobility, the surgeon Felix, under immense pressure, successfully performed the surgery. He used a specially made scalpel with a probe attached at the end, which he inserted into the intestinal tract along the fistula. Using his right hand, he connected it and then withdrew the probe from below, easily opening up the fistula. Next, Felix extended scissors to the root of the fistula deep into the wound and cut away all visible parts of the fistula. Despite the surgery sounding excruciatingly painful, it is noteworthy that Louis XIV, the patient, maintained great restraint throughout, not uttering any groans that might compromise his dignity, only murmuring quietly to God. The day after the surgery, Louis XIV began to work as usual. He did not allow himself any time to recover, which was admirable for his dedication to governance. However, the surgery did not completely resolve the issue. On the 15th day, Felix realized that despite his skill, his scalpel had not reached the root of the problem. On December 7th, he had to destroy the forming scar tissue, clean the wound, and make several incisions to expose the bottom of the fistula. The pain of the second surgery was even greater than the first, but the king endured the immense pain with remarkable fortitude. This time, at the persuasion of those around him, Louis XIV rested for 8 days to allow the wound to heal. 85 days later, the king fully recovered. After the successful surgery, Louis XIV's recovery won the frenzied adoration of the French people. In tribute to the king, many nobles even tied bandages around themselves. The composer Lully composed the famous Te Deum to celebrate the king's recovery and to praise him. It is said that the tune of the current British national anthem, God Save the Queen, was also derived from Lully's Grand Dieu sauve le roi, composed to pray for the success of the king's anal fistula surgery. The success of the surgery led to the surgeon Felix being ennobled, awarded lands and wealth. More importantly, this event greatly elevated the status of surgeons and prompted the French court to start focusing on the study of surgical medicine, eventually leading to the establishment of the Royal College of Surgery during the reign of Louis XV. From that point, Louis XIV seemed to have definitively beaten death, temporarily keeping it at bay. However, this did not mean that the king's health issues were completely resolved. After turning 50, Louis XIV began to suffer from various ailments associated with aging, including rheumatism, colic, gout, migraines, indigestion, and diabetes. These medical records are well preserved in the French National Archives. Due to Louis XIV's fondness for sweets, his dental condition was also poor, and he underwent several minor dental surgeries. Despite this, for the Sun King, who was accustomed to illness, the pain of tooth extraction was almost negligible. Louis XIV's vitality was incredibly strong, but ultimately he passed away just before his 77th birthday, succumbing to gangrene caused by diabetes. This diabetes was largely due to his long-term indulgence in excessive eating and drinking. If he had heeded the advice of his wife, Madame de Maintenon, to arrange his diet more sensibly in his later years, it might have been possible to extend his life, potentially even beyond the age of 80.